Hello friends, welcome to this Cloud Pedagogy hands-on lab where we will be creating an EC2 instance using a Lambda function. AWS Lambda is a serverless compute service that runs your code in response to events and automatically manages the underlying compute resources for you. You can use AWS Lambda to extend other AWS services with custom logic or create your own backend services that operate at AWS scale, performance, and security. So in this lab, we will write a Lambda function that will create an EC2 instance. This Lambda function will be written in Python using Boto3 library. So let's start with our task. First, we are going to create an IAM role with permissions for the Lambda function. And then we will create a Lambda function written in Python using the Boto3 library along with an IAM role. Finally, we will test and check the result of Lambda execution. So now that we know what we need to accomplish, start with our task. So let's start with the task 1, create an IAM role. We create an IAM role that has the permissions like Lambda basic permissions, access to Amazon CloudWatch logs. So first we create a policy and then attach the policy to this role. Let's get logged into the AWS console. So what we need to do is under security, identity and compliance, let's select IAM. We are going to select policies on the left hand side and then click create policy. On this page, we are going to select JSON, copy the code from the link and apply this execution policy to the Lambda function in the later task. So let's go ahead and select that. We are going to copy this policy, then we are going to paste it in here. And let's look at the policy and see what it allows. So we have the CloudWatch logs. So we can create log groups and we have added the EC2 run instances to allow create log streams and put log events. So click next, enter the policy name and then click create policy. Good, our policy is created and the next thing we have to do is attach this to our role. So let's create a role. We're going to select roles on the left hand side and then click create role. Select trusted entity type as AWS service. For the use case, select Lambda and then click next. Search for our policy which we created a minute ago and then select the checkbox next to it and then hit next. Give a name to the role and then click create role. Okay, great. We have accomplished our first task by creating a policy and then attach it to a role. In the next task, we are going to create a Lambda function. In this task, we are going to create a Lambda function. So let's back to our services and under compute, again, let's select Lambda. We are going to select create a function. Now we have a couple of options that we can choose from here. We are going to be authorizing from scratch, but you could also use a blueprint or browse to serverless app repository. So the first thing that we need to do is give our function a name. We are going to call our Lambda function cp lambda create EC2. Under runtime, we are going to select Python latest version. Under permissions, click select existing role and then select our role which we have created in the task 1. So click on create function. Next we create our Boto3 resource for our EC2 instance which will give us access to all the EC2 functions in the Boto3 library. Copy the code from the description. So delete our original code and insert the code below in its place. Let's have a look at the code. So let's see what this Lambda function is doing. Here we see we are importing some libraries. For example, import the Boto3 library and the Boto3 library is the AWS SDK for Python. So next we have to define our entry point which all Python functions have and you may know that it is by Lambda handler. Next we need to add some global variables. You will notice the variables in all caps and all equal OS environment. This means we will use an environment variable for this. So import OS allows to access our environment variable in the import statement. So for example, for AMI, this is the AWS mission image that we are going to use to provision our EC2 instance. So we have max and min count of 1 because we are only creating one instance. And finally, we will print it out with some cool message along with instance ID. So now let's go up here and deploy our code. Since we want this Lambda function to be reusable, we are not going to hard code these values, but we will add parameters using the environment variables. So we will provide these in Lambda by choosing configurations and then select environment variables. Then enter our variable information. So our first environment variable is cpami. So we are going to copy that and we are going to paste it in. For the AMI ID, search in AWS Marketplace. Go to AMI catalog in the AMI link here in EC2 console. Here I am using Amazon Linux 2023 AMI ID. Let's go back to our Lambda management console and let's paste it in. Okay, we are going to also add instance type. So for the instance type, we are going to be using T3 medium. But you can use a different type in your own environment if you'd like to. And our last environment variable is subnet ID. For subnet ID, our subnet ID, enter one of the public subnet ID from your VPC. Let's go back to our EC2 console. Go back to the services. Under services, we are going to scroll down to the networking and content delivery and select VPC. Select subnets in the left navigation menu and you will see that there are few subnets that have been provided by default. So I'm going to copy one of the public subnet ID and go back to our Lambda management console and paste it in with this ID. Let's save our function one more time and deploy our function one more time. That's good job. So our function has been created with all the configurations that are required to create EC2 instance. In the final task, we are going to test the function. Since our function is ready, you can now test your function using the blue test button over here. So let's run a test. So we select test. We are going to leave hello world. We are going to give this a name, an event name of CP test. And remember, we don't have an event or context for this lab, so we are going to delete this and we are going to just leave open parenthesis and we are going to click save. So let's start with our testing. So we hit test here. So we set up our test and now let's run it. And you will see that our test is running and we have a successful execution, which is amazing. So let's go back to our other tab. Let's select EC2 and let's select running instances. And look at this. So our Lambda function has just created this EC2 instance and it's now initializing, which is perfect. Congratulations, you just created your Lambda function that creates an EC2 instance at the push of a button, and we were able to verify that everything is up and running. Finally, it's a reminder time. Please clear your resources that are created for this lab. So that's all for today's lab and I'll see you again in my next lab. Until then, take care and have fun with learning.